The flight attendant handed me a different boarding pass and said, "You don't want to be on that plane. Trust me. Danny Volkov," she whispered before I could even look at the new ticket. "I saw you on the news before the trial. My sister worked at the courthouse until 3 days ago." Her hands were shaking as she pressed the boarding pass into my palm. "Those men in first class on your original flight? They're not businessmen." My blood turned to ice. Nobody had called me Danny Volkov in 8 months. The name was supposed to be buried, erased, replaced with Thomas Garrett from Milwaukee. Insurance adjuster. Boring life, forgettable face, the kind of person who disappeared into crowds and never made headlines. "I think there's been a mistake," I started, but she cut me off. "Gate 23, not Gate 15. Flight 892 to Seattle, not Flight 445 to Miami." Her voice was barely audible over the airport noise, passengers wheeling luggage past us, announcements echoing from overhead speakers. "And my name isn't Lisa Chen like this badge says. It's Rachel Donnelly. My sister was Detective Angela Donnelly." The name hit me like a physical blow. Detective Donnelly had been my first contact when I entered witness protection. She'd promised me that testifying against Dmitry Volkov would be worth the risk, that justice would prevail, that good people would keep me alive long enough to see him convicted. She'd been found dead in her car 4 days ago. Single vehicle accident on a rainy night. No witnesses. "Angela's dead," I said, the words feeling like glass in my throat. "Murdered. Made to look like an accident. But I know better." Rachel's professional flight attendant smile never wavered, but tears were building in her eyes. "She called me the night before she died. Said she'd discovered something about your case, about someone on the inside feeding information to the Bratva. She was scared, really scared, for the first time in her career." The airport terminal suddenly felt smaller, more claustrophobic. Security cameras tracked every movement. Exit signs might as well have been painted on the walls for all the good they'd do me. I'd been running from Dmitry Volkov's organization for 8 months, ever since I witnessed him execute 3 federal agents in a warehouse in Queens. The trial was supposed to start in 10 days. I was the only witness still breathing. "How do you know who I am?" I asked, though part of me was terrified of the answer. Rachel adjusted something on her uniform, maintaining the pretense that this was a routine passenger service interaction. "Because Angela showed me your photo. She was worried about you, said the marshals assigned to your protection seemed nervous, like they didn't trust their own system. And because I recognize one of the men sitting in first class on Flight 445. She pulled out her phone, pretended to check something official, but turned the screen toward me. A surveillance photo of a man with pale eyes and a scar running from his left ear to his jaw. "Alexei Kozlov. Angela had him under surveillance for 6 weeks. He specializes in mid-flight accidents, heart attacks, allergic reactions, food poisoning, things that don't look suspicious at 30,000 feet. My legs felt weak. I'd been so careful, following every protocol the marshals had given me. New identity, new background, new habits. I'd even changed the way I walked, the way I held my shoulders. But somehow, they'd found me anyway. "There's a second man with him," Rachel continued, swiping to another photo. "Viktor Petrov, demolitions expert. If Kozlov can't make it look natural, Petrov makes it look like mechanical failure. Engine trouble, cabin pressure problems, pilot error." I looked toward Gate 15 where passengers were already boarding Flight 445. Normal people heading home to families, business meetings, vacations. None of them knowing they were about to share a plane with professional killers. None of them knowing that their flight had been chosen as the site of my execution. "Why are you helping me?" I asked. "If they killed Angela, helping me puts you in their crosshairs too." Rachel's smile finally cracked, and for a moment, I saw the grief and rage she'd been hiding behind her professional mask. Because Angela died believing that justice mattered. She thought if enough good people did their jobs properly, the system would work. Maybe she was naive, but she was also brave. And maybe if I can keep you alive long enough to testify, her death will mean something. The boarding pass in my hand showed Gate 23, Flight 892 to Seattle. Different airline, different destination, different departure time. Rachel had somehow accessed the computer system and moved me to a flight that wasn't on anyone's radar. But it was a temporary fix to a permanent problem. "They'll figure out what happened eventually," I said, looking around at the security cameras, the electronic systems that tracked every transaction, every movement. "There's always a digital trail." "I know. That's why we both need to disappear after this. I've got vacation days saved up, and my supervisor thinks I'm taking a long weekend in Vegas. By the time they realize what I've done, we'll be long gone." She handed me a small piece of paper along with the boarding pass. "My uncle owns a cabin in the Cascades, completely off the grid, no internet, no cell service. We can hide there until the trial." The intercom crackled overhead. "Final boarding call for Flight 445 to Miami, departing from Gate 15. I watched as the last few passengers hurried toward the gate, including 2 men in expensive suits who moved with the predatory grace of apex hunters, Kozlov and Petrov, expecting to complete their mission somewhere over the Atlantic. "What about your job, your life here?" I asked Rachel. "What life? Angela was all the family I had left. This job barely pays enough to survive, and now I know that the people I work for can't protect their employees from criminals." She reached up and unpinned her flight attendant wings. dropping them in a nearby trash can. Sometimes you have to choose between being safe and being right. We walked toward Gate 23 together, two people whose lives had just been shattered by forces beyond their control. But as we moved through the terminal, I started noticing things that made my paranoia spike even higher. The man reading a newspaper near the coffee shop who'd been in 3 different locations over the past 10 minutes. The woman talking on her phone who kept glancing in our direction. The subtle hand signals between security guards that weren't part of any standard airport protocol. Rachel, I said quietly, I think we have a bigger problem than just 2 hitmen on a plane. She followed my gaze and saw what I was seeing. The surveillance network, the watchers, the carefully coordinated positioning of people who were pretending to be passengers or airport employees. How many of them are there? Too many. This whole thing was planned from the beginning. They knew I'd be here, at this terminal, at this time. The flight to Miami was just one option. They've got backup plans, backup teams, probably backup flights. I felt the walls closing in around us, the weight of invisible eyes tracking our every movement. Rachel grabbed my arm, steering me toward a service corridor marked Authorized Personnel Only. She swiped her employee card, and we ducked into a maze of maintenance areas and employee break rooms. There's something else, she said as we hurried through the narrow hallways. Something Angela discovered before she died. What kind of something? Your handler, Deputy Marshal James Crawford. Angela found out he's been feeding information to Dmitry Volkov for the past 2 years. Not just about you, about other witnesses too. She had bank records showing payments from shell companies controlled by the Bratva. She was going to turn him in the next morning. The corridor seemed to stretch endlessly ahead of us, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the smell of industrial cleaning supplies burning my nostrils. Crawford had been my lifeline for 8 months. The one person I trusted completely, the man who'd promised that the system would protect me if I had the courage to testify. Every safe house, every new identity, every relocation, I said, the full scope of the betrayal hitting me like a freight train. He's been giving them everything, not just giving, selling. Angela found evidence of at least 12 witnesses who disappeared while under Crawford's protection. The Marshal's Service thinks they were discovered by accident, that their covers were blown by bad luck or careless mistakes, but Angela figured out the pattern. We reached a service elevator that would take us down to the parking garage level. As we waited for it to arrive, Rachel pulled out her phone and showed me a series of text messages. These are from Angela the night before she died. Look at the timestamps. The messages painted a picture of growing terror. Angela had discovered not just Crawford's betrayal, but evidence of a larger conspiracy within the federal system. Judges who dismissed cases for no apparent reason. Prosecutors who filed motions that weakened their own cases. FBI agents who seemed to lose crucial evidence at convenient moments. The whole system is compromised, Rachel said, as the elevator doors opened. Not just one corrupt marshal, but an entire network of people working for the Bratva. Angela called it a cancer that had metastasized through every level of law enforcement. The parking garage was dimly lit and mostly empty. Rachel led me to her car, a beat-up sedan that looked like it had seen better decades. But as she fumbled with her keys, I noticed something that made my blood freeze. Fresh tire tracks in the dust near her parking space. Someone had been here recently, someone who'd known exactly which car to look for. Rachel, don't, I started to say, but it was too late. She'd already opened the driver's side door. The explosion wasn't massive, just big enough to destroy the car and kill anyone inside it. The blast threw us both backward, ears ringing, covered in debris. Rachel was unconscious, blood trickling from a cut on her forehead. I was bruised but mobile, and the sound of approaching footsteps meant we didn't have time for medical attention. 3 men emerged from behind concrete pillars, moving with military precision toward our position. Not airport security, not police responding to the explosion. These were the professionals, the cleanup crew sent to finish what Kozlov and Petrov had started. I half-carried, half-dragged Rachel toward the stairwell, my ears still ringing from the blast. Behind us, I could hear the men coordinating their search, speaking in accented English mixed with Russian phrases. They weren't in a hurry. They knew we had nowhere to run. The stairwell led back up to the terminal, but that way was blocked by more of their people. Down led to a sub-basement level that housed mechanical equipment and freight elevators. I chose down, hoping to find another way out, knowing that every second counted. Rachel was starting to regain consciousness as we reached the basement level. What happened? She mumbled, touching the cut on her forehead. Car bomb. Small one, just big enough to kill us if we'd gotten inside. They were watching your car, waiting for us to try to escape. I helped her stand, checking for serious injuries. Can you walk? She nodded, though she was clearly shaky. Where are we? Basement level. Freight area, mechanical rooms, probably some kind of service tunnel that connects to other parts of the airport. I looked around at the maze of pipes and electrical conduits. We need to find another way out, and we need to do it fast. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the stairwell behind us. They'd figured out which direction we'd gone and were following methodically, checking every room, every possible hiding place. Professional hunters tracking wounded prey. This way, Rachel said, pointing toward a service tunnel marked with signs indicating it led to the main terminal building. If we can get to the public areas, they won't be able to just shoot us without witnesses. We moved through the tunnel as quickly as Rachel's condition would allow. The walls were lined with cables and pipes, the air thick with the hum of electrical equipment. Every few hundred feet, there were emergency phones and fire safety equipment, reminders that we were still within the bounds of civilization, even if it felt like we were crawling through the bowels of some mechanical beast. Halfway through the tunnel, Rachel grabbed my arm and pulled me into an alcove housing electrical panels. "Listen," she whispered. Footsteps again, but ahead of us this time, not behind. They'd split up, sent teams to both ends of the tunnel. We were trapped in the middle, with nowhere to go but deeper into the mechanical infrastructure of the airport. "There's something I need to tell you," Rachel said, her voice barely audible over the ambient noise. "Angela didn't just discover Crawford's betrayal. She figured out why the Bratva wanted you dead so badly. It's not just about the warehouse murders." "What do you mean?" "The 3 federal agents you saw Dmitry Volkov kill, they weren't just random targets. They were investigating something bigger, something that goes beyond organized crime." Rachel pulled out her phone and showed me a series of photos Angela had taken. Documents, financial records, shipping manifests. They were tracking money laundering operations that connect the Bratva to legitimate businesses, political campaigns, even federal contracts. The photos showed a web of corruption that made my testimony seem like a minor detail in a much larger conspiracy. Defense contractors, congressional campaigns, infrastructure projects. The Bratva wasn't just a criminal organization, it was a shadow partner in dozens of legitimate enterprises. "Your testimony about the warehouse murders is just the beginning," Rachel continued. "If Volkov goes to trial, if he decides to cooperate with prosecutors to reduce his sentence, he could expose the entire network. Hundreds of millions of dollars, dozens of prominent people, the kind of scandal that brings down governments." The footsteps were getting closer from both directions. I could hear voices now, men coordinating their search in professional whispers. We had maybe 2 minutes before they reached our hiding spot. "Is there another way out of here?" I asked, looking around at the maze of pipes and conduits. Rachel studied the tunnel layout, running her hands along the walls. "Maintenance shaft," she said, pointing to an access panel near the ceiling. "Should connect to the ventilation system. If we can get into the ductwork, we might be able to reach a different part of the building." I boosted her up first, then pulled myself into the narrow shaft after her. The space was barely wide enough for a human body, filled with dust and the smell of stale air, but it was moving air, which meant it was connected to the outside world somehow. We crawled through the ductwork for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. The metal groaned under our weight, and every junction forced us to make decisions about which direction might lead to safety. Finally, we reached a grate that looked out into what appeared to be a loading dock area. The loading dock was busy with freight deliveries and airport service vehicles. Normal activity, normal people doing normal jobs. We dropped down from the ventilation shaft and tried to blend in with the workers, just 2 more airport employees having a bad day. "We need transportation," Rachel said, looking around at the various vehicles, something they won't be able to track immediately. A delivery truck was parked near the loading dock, engine running, driver nowhere in sight. Rachel climbed into the passenger seat while I got behind the wheel. The truck was loaded with catering supplies for airlines, nothing valuable enough to justify a massive manhunt. We drove out of the airport complex and onto the highway, both of us checking mirrors constantly for signs of pursuit. The truck was slow and ungainly, but it was anonymous, just another commercial vehicle in traffic. "Where do we go now?" Rachel asked. "Your marshal is compromised. My supervisor probably thinks I'm dead, and we're fugitives from both sides of the law." "There's someone I need to contact," I said, pulling out a burner phone I'd kept hidden for emergencies. "A reporter who's been investigating federal corruption. If we can get our story to him, if he can verify what Angela discovered, maybe we can expose the whole network before they kill us." I dialed a number I'd memorized months ago. David Kim, investigative journalist with the Seattle Times. He'd written articles about organized crime's infiltration of legitimate businesses, about corruption in federal law enforcement. If anyone would believe our story and have the resources to investigate it properly, it would be him. "This is Kim." "David Kim? This is Danny Volkov. I'm the witness in the Dmitry Volkov case. I have information about federal corruption, about law enforcement officials working for organized crime. People are trying to kill me to prevent me from talking." There was a long pause. "Where are you?" "Driving north from the airport. I have a companion, Rachel Donnelly. Her sister was Detective Angela Donnelly, who was murdered 3 days ago for investigating the corruption. I know about Detective Donnelly's death, suspicious circumstances, but the official report says accident." Kim's voice was cautious, but interested. "What kind of information do you have?" "Audio recordings, financial documents, evidence that Deputy Marshal James Crawford has been selling witness information to the Bratva, evidence of a larger conspiracy involving judges, prosecutors, FBI agents, the kind of story that ends careers and sends people to prison for life. Can you get to Seattle? I have a secure location where we can meet, review the evidence, verify the claims independently. We'll be there in 8 hours, I said, then hung up and destroyed the phone. Rachel had been listening to the conversation, and her expression was grim. "You realize this is our only chance, right? If this reporter can't help us, if the story doesn't break in time, we're dead." "I know, but staying hidden forever isn't an option. They'll find us eventually, no matter how careful we are. The only way to stay alive is to make the truth public, to make killing us more dangerous than letting us live. We drove through the afternoon and into the evening, switching vehicles twice to avoid being tracked. Rachel used her airline connections to get us seats on a late-night bus to Portland, then another bus to Seattle. By morning, we were exhausted, paranoid, but still alive. David Kim met us at a coffee shop in downtown Seattle, but after 10 minutes of conversation, he suggested we move to a more secure location. His newspaper's office had been broken into twice in the past month, and he'd been receiving threats related to his investigation of federal corruption. "There's a safe house," he said, leading us to his car, used by journalists who work on sensitive stories, off the books, funded by a foundation that supports investigative reporting. The kind of place where sources can speak freely without worrying about surveillance. The safe house was a modest apartment in a residential neighborhood, filled with recording equipment, document scanners, and secure communication systems. Kim spent 3 hours reviewing the evidence Rachel and I had brought, asking detailed questions, cross-referencing information with his own research. "This is bigger than I thought," he said finally. "The corruption network you've uncovered connects to cases I've been investigating independently. Defense contracts awarded to companies with Bratva connections, infrastructure projects that exist only on paper, political campaigns funded with laundered money." He pulled out a thick file folder filled with his own research. "I've been tracking suspicious financial patterns for 18 months, but I never had the inside source to confirm what was really happening. Your testimony, combined with Detective Donnelly's research, provides the missing pieces. How long before you can publish?" Rachel asked. "The basic story, the corruption allegations, the evidence of witness intimidation. I can have that online in 6 hours. The full investigation will take weeks, but the initial reporting should be enough to trigger federal investigations that can't be buried." Kim was already typing on his laptop, organizing the evidence, drafting the article that would expose the conspiracy. But as he worked, I kept thinking about the people who were hunting us. Professional killers with unlimited resources and connections throughout the federal system. Even if Kim's story broke, even if it triggered investigations and arrests, would it be enough to keep us alive? "There's something else," I said, interrupting Kim's work. "The warehouse murders I witnessed, the reason I'm testifying against Dmitry Volkov, that was just the beginning. The 3 federal agents he killed were investigating something that could bring down the entire network." Kim looked up from his laptop. What were they investigating? "A shipment of weapons that disappeared from a military base in Virginia. High-grade military equipment that was supposed to be destroyed, but instead was sold to the Bratva. The agents traced the sale to a consortium of defense contractors and federal officials who've been looting military stockpiles for years." The room went quiet as the implications sank in. This wasn't just about money laundering or witness intimidation anymore. This was about national security, about weapons that could be used for terrorism or sold to hostile foreign governments. "I need to make some calls," Kim said, reaching for his secure phone. "This story is too big for just one newspaper. We need to coordinate with other journalists, other agencies, make sure the information gets out through multiple channels simultaneously." While Kim made his calls, Rachel and I tried to process what our lives had become. 48 hours ago, I'd been an anonymous witness preparing for a routine organized crime trial. Now we were fugitives hiding from assassins while trying to expose a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government. "Do you think we'll survive this?" Rachel asked, looking out the window at the Seattle skyline. "I think we have to try," I said. "For Angela, for the other witnesses who didn't make it, for the agents who died trying to investigate this. Someone has to tell the truth, even if it costs us everything." Kim finished his calls and returned to his laptop, typing furiously. "The story breaks in 2 hours," he said. "Coordinated release across 5 different news organizations, with copies of all evidence distributed to federal agencies that haven't been compromised. By tonight, everyone will know what's been happening." Those 2 hours felt like the longest of my life. Every sound outside made us jump. Every car that slowed down in front of the building made us check the windows. We were so close to exposing the truth, but also so vulnerable to the people who would kill to keep it hidden. At exactly 6 p.m. Pacific time, David Kim's story went live. Federal corruption network exposed. Marshall, prosecutors accused of working with organized crime. Within minutes, it was being shared across social media, picked up by other news outlets, generating the kind of attention that couldn't be ignored or suppressed. But our celebration was short-lived. Kim's secure phone rang, and his expression grew grim as he listened to the caller. "They found the safe house," he said after hanging up. "Federal agents are on their way, but we don't know if they're the good guys or part of the corruption network. We need to leave. Now." We grabbed the essential evidence and fled through the back exit, just as black SUVs pulled up in front of the building. The same kind of vehicles that had surrounded us at the airport, the same professional coordination that suggested this wasn't a legitimate law enforcement operation. "Where do we go?" Rachel asked as we ran through back alleys and side streets. "The FBI field office," Kim said. "I know an agent there who's been investigating the corruption independently. If we can get to her, if we can trust her, maybe we can survive long enough for the full investigation to unfold." Special Agent Sarah Michaels met us at the FBI building, but instead of taking us inside, She led us to a parking garage and gestured for us to get into her personal vehicle. The office has been compromised, she said. Too many people with questionable loyalties, too many opportunities for information to leak to the wrong places. Where are we going? I asked. Safe house. Real one this time, not on any official records, funded through a black budget that only 3 people know about. Michaels drove through Seattle traffic with the confidence of someone who'd done this before. I've been investigating the corruption network for 2 years, building cases independently, waiting for the right moment to move. Your story, combined with Kim's reporting, gives us the ammunition we need. The real safe house was a fortified apartment in an industrial area, with security cameras, armored windows, and communication equipment that couldn't be monitored or traced. Michaels explained that she'd been working with a small group of federal agents who'd realized that normal channels couldn't be trusted. How many others are there? Rachel asked. 12 of us, spread across different agencies, FBI, DEA, ATF, even a couple of people in the Marshal's service who realized what Crawford was doing. Michaels pulled out a detailed organizational chart showing the corruption network. We've been mapping the connections, identifying the key players, waiting for enough evidence to move against all of them simultaneously. The chart was staggering in its scope. Deputy Marshal Crawford was just one node in a network that included federal judges, prosecutors, senior FBI officials, and even a congressman who sat on the House Judiciary Committee. The Bratva hadn't just bribed a few officials. They'd systematically compromised an entire segment of the federal justice system. Why haven't you moved against them before now? I asked. Because they're too well connected, too well protected. Any investigation that targeted just a few of them would be blocked or buried by their allies. We needed a smoking gun, something so obvious and undeniable that even their protectors couldn't ignore it. Michaels pointed to my name on the chart. Your testimony about the warehouse murders is that smoking gun. Once Dmitry Volkov is in custody, once the trial begins, the pressure will force them to make mistakes. But as we talked, I realized that the trial might never happen. If the corruption was as extensive as Michaels claimed, if it reached as high as she suggested, then powerful people had every reason to make sure I never made it to a courtroom. They're going to try to kill me before the trial starts, I said. They can't risk me testifying, can't risk Volkov deciding to cooperate with prosecutors. I know. That's why we're moving the trial up. Instead of 10 days, it starts in 72 hours. Emergency motion, emergency judicial panel, the kind of speed that doesn't give the corruption network time to organize a response. Michaels showed me a court document that had been filed an hour earlier. Judge Patricia Hoffman is presiding. She's one of the few federal judges we're certain hasn't been compromised. 72 hours. 3 days to stay alive, to avoid the assassins, to make it to a courtroom where I could finally tell the truth about what I'd witnessed. It seemed both impossibly long and terrifyingly short. The first attempt on our lives came 6 hours later. A precision strike team that breached the safe house security like it was made of paper. Military-grade weapons, night vision equipment, coordination that suggested extensive training and planning. They knew exactly where we were, exactly how many people were in the building. But Agent Michaels had prepared for this possibility. Hidden escape routes, backup security systems, contingency plans that activated the moment the primary defenses were compromised. We escaped through a tunnel that connected to the city's storm drain system, emerging 6 blocks away, where another FBI vehicle was waiting. They're not just trying to kill us anymore, Michaels said as we sped through the empty streets. They're trying to destroy all the evidence, eliminate everyone who knows about the corruption network. This is desperation, the kind of scorched earth response that happens when everything falls apart. The second safe house lasted 12 hours before it was discovered. The third lasted 8. By the morning of the trial, we were hiding in a federal courthouse, protected by the small group of agents Michaels trusted, surrounded by the kind of security normally reserved for presidential visits. But even in the courthouse, even surrounded by armed guards and metal detectors, I could feel the weight of invisible threats, corrupt officials who could walk through any security checkpoint, judges who might dismiss charges for procedural reasons, prosecutors who might accidentally destroy key evidence. Are you ready for this? Rachel asked as we waited in a secure room adjacent to the courtroom. I don't think anyone can be ready for something like this, I said. But I'm going to do it anyway. For Angela, for the agents who died, for everyone else who didn't make it this far. The trial of Dmitry Volkov began at 9 a.m. on a Thursday morning. Judge Hoffman's courtroom was packed with reporters, federal agents, and spectators who'd been following the corruption story. Television cameras were prohibited, but sketch artists captured every moment as the most important organized crime trial in decades got underway. I testified for 6 hours, walking the jury through every detail of what I'd witnessed in that Queens warehouse. The execution of 3 federal agents, the discussion of weapons sales, the casual brutality of men who treated murder like a business transaction. Dmitry Volkov sat at the defendant's table, staring at me with the kind of cold hatred that promised retribution if he ever got the chance. But the most dramatic moment came when Prosecutor Elizabeth Warren called Deputy Marshal James Crawford to the witness stand. The man who'd been my handler, who'd promised to keep me safe, who'd been selling information about witnesses to the people trying to kill them. Crawford tried to maintain his innocence, but the evidence was overwhelming. bank records showing payments from Bratva shell companies, audio recordings of him discussing witness locations with known criminals, testimony from other agents who'd suspected his betrayal but hadn't been able to prove it. How many witnesses died because of information you provided to Dmitry Volkov's organization? Prosecutor Warren asked. Crawford's lawyer objected, but Judge Hoffman allowed the question. 12 that we can prove, Warren continued. 12 people who trusted the federal system to protect them, who believed that doing the right thing would keep them safe. How much did you get paid for each death? The courtroom erupted in shouting and chaos. Volkov's lawyers demanded a mistrial. Crawford's attorney claimed prosecutorial misconduct, but Judge Hoffman restored order and allowed the testimony to continue. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Testimony from dozens of witnesses, evidence of corruption that reached the highest levels of government, revelations that made national headlines every day. Rachel testified about Angela's murder, about the investigation that had cost her sister's life. David Kim testified about the threats he'd received while investigating the story. In the end, Dmitry Volkov was convicted on all counts and sentenced to life without parole. James Crawford received 25 years for corruption and conspiracy to commit murder. 6 other federal officials were indicted as the investigation expanded, and congressional hearings were announced to examine the broader implications of the corruption network. But victory came with a price that neither Rachel nor I could have anticipated. Our faces were on television every night. Our names were in newspaper headlines. We'd become public figures in a way that made anonymity impossible and normal life a distant memory. The Witness Protection Program offered us new identities, but we both knew that wouldn't be enough. Too many people had seen us. Too many enemies knew what we looked like. Too many powerful interests wanted revenge for what we'd exposed. What happens now? Rachel asked as we sat in yet another safe house. This one in a rural area outside Portland. Now we disappear for real, I said. Not through official channels, not through government programs, but on our own terms. New names, new faces if necessary, new lives in places where nobody knows our history. We never saw each other again after that week in Portland. Rachel moved to Europe, I heard later, working for an international human rights organization under a name I didn't recognize. I moved to a small town in Montana, took a job teaching high school mathematics, became the kind of unremarkable person who blends into small-town life without attracting attention. Sometimes I see news stories about corruption cases that grew out of the Volkov trial, federal officials sentenced to prison, defense contractors exposed for fraudulent billing, political campaigns forced to return donations from questionable sources. The web of corruption we'd helped expose continued to unravel for years, sending dozens of people to prison and changing how federal law enforcement agencies monitored their own personnel. David Kim won a Pulitzer Prize for his reporting on the case. Agent Michaels was promoted to run a new task force focused on investigating corruption within federal agencies. Judge Hoffman received death threats for months, but continued to preside over high-profile corruption trials with the same fairness and integrity she'd shown during the Volkov case. But the victory was bittersweet. Angela Donnelly never got to see the people who killed her brought to justice. The 3 federal agents who died in that Queens warehouse never got to testify about the weapons trafficking they'd been investigating. Too many people paid with their lives for a system of justice that was supposed to protect the innocent and punish the guilty. 5 years later, I still look over my shoulder when I walk down the street. I still check locks twice before going to bed. I still wonder if the next stranger I meet might be someone from my past, someone with a long memory and access to the resources needed for revenge. But I sleep better knowing that the truth came out, that the corruption network was exposed, that other witnesses might have a better chance of survival because of what we sacrificed to make the system work the way it was supposed to.